Hi there. I'd like to share with you why the recently announced Harry Potter Reboot remake TV series being developed by J.K. Rowling with Warner Discovery, why this Harry Potter reboot fills me with hope. It fills me with hope because if an idea this bad could happen and get the green light, a reboot that no one asked for a faithful adaptation which was totally unnecessary, it gives me hope that we could seriously be talking about an A Song of Ice and Fire Game of Thrones reboot 10 years from now as opposed to 30 years from now. That if you just stumbled across this video, this is a Game of Thrones House of the Dragon news and analysis channel. That was my main takeaway from that, just thinking about that. I'm not really involved in Harry Potter fandom. I haven't read the books, I've seen the movies, they were decent as movies, I was just too old to really get into it. That thinking on it, if the TV industry can do something this ridiculous that no one asked for, that no one is supportive of this as an idea, what about, where we were, that we got screwed over with this isn't an adaptation of the A Song of Ice and Fire novels? There were problems, little cracks in the first 4 seasons that were getting worse. It wasn't, it's just the final season. Season 5, when they still had books, they didn't outpace the books. They just compressed the last 2 into one season. They wanted to leave to do Star Wars movies. And we know this. They later said, after season 3, we just didn't want to be there. We didn't want to commit to 10 seasons or whatever. They were self-consciously trying to just burn through material to leave. They were never loyal to this. And season 5 went totally off the rails with the invented Sansa rape, TV Dorne, butchering Stannis, and then every season was something else ridiculous, like the crazy Arya with a gut wound parkour chase through Bravos, or the genuinely nonsensical Littlefinger death, or the White Hunt. And this is before season 8. Like, I know it's a sorting algorithm that anyone who was still watching by season 8 are people who weren't turned off by the prior seasons and thought these weren't deal breakers. If you thought it was a deal breaker, you stopped watching. That this was a terrible adaptation, that they were not reflecting the views of the author. This was in fact deeply offensive, a lot of what they were doing, purely as a TV show. This was bad writing, or the Sansa rape was offensive and they just stopped talking about it and people learned to stop asking. That we never got A Song of Ice and Fire adaptation. For casual viewers who just click on it then leave, they go, why do you still care? On a book fan site, for book fans who've been reading this on a scale of 10 years or more, 20 years in some cases, if you're around from the beginning, I don't want this to be the only shot in an adaptation of this in my lifetime. And that just if Harry Potter could be this stupid, unnecessary reboot, the same company could within 10 years be talking about a reboot of A Song of Ice and Fire. Why is this a stupid idea? Well, it was a really faithful and iconic movie adaptation. Comparing this to Lord of the Rings, this is quick off the top of my head. When it's a dead author, you can't really say whether something is definitive. Like Lord of the Rings, while a very good movie series, I say it's 90% good. Nothing is ever going to be totally definitive. I fully expect there to be a Lord of the Rings remake on the scale of a century, much as there's remakes of the King Arthur legends. That it's a major part of literature, or a remake of the Three Musketeers or something. Major work of literature will get remade over time, because there's no one right way to do it, because the author wasn't alive while they were making it. And the movies were good enough that I feel that any new remake would be a roll of the dice, that nothing can ever aspire to be better than 90%. So like a reboot would fix some of the problems you had with what Jackson did, but might introduce other problems. So it might not be worth the risk versus a very unfaithful adaptation of something. Well, the example I thought was, okay, if it's dead authors, it doesn't really comparable. Living authors who had a reboot of something that they were generally approving of at the time. Stephen King. Stephen King has had a couple of adaptations of the same thing, and those usually fall into two categories. Number one is the technology got better. Like with It, the miniseries with Pennywise, the technology got a lot better 20 years after the original miniseries, and the movies are pretty good. I mean, they're roughly, to me, as equal to the miniseries. I like them both. Or like Salem's Lot or something, like the special effects don't hold up as long. Or point two, while it was a well-received movie, there were points where King could legitimately say this wasn't an 100% faithful adaptation or they had to cut things. Case in point, The Shining. Infamously, he argued with Stanley Kubrick that while it is an amazing film with amazing cinematography, there's story points that he strongly disagreed with. That he said, well, it doesn't end with ice. His version ends with fire. It burns at the end, and it's about domestic abuse and all this other reasons he gave for why he then made a miniseries adaptation of The Shining, which was very different. So the main thing here is, was it a faithful adaptation? Did things get cut or not? J.K. Rowling was intimately involved with the movie series as they were making it, and she was still writing her book series as they were doing it. That'll never be replicated, that the fourth book came out right before the first movie. So I don't want to put too much weight behind it was iconic, because Stephen King has had remakes of movies that were iconic because either the technology got better or he felt it wasn't faithful tonally or things got cut in a certain way. Versus, I'm struggling to think of what a remake would even do differently. Now, I admit, in all humility, I haven't read the Harry Potter books, I just saw the movies, but I've been trying to go through lists of what they would do differently. It just seems like different little side stories and subplots that got cut, which don't really justify having a remake. And on top of that, as long of a remake as she seems to be asking for, this is a whole other point, she wants 10 seasons. 10 TV seasons as a remake of her book series. Now, I looked this up. The 8 movies, 7 books, the last one was split, so it's 8 movies. The Harry Potter movies have a combined runtime of a little under 20 hours. Question is, how long are these 10 TV seasons? Does she mean, well, it's like the British model where it's really like 3 episodes per season, so it's like 3 hours of content times 10 is 30 hours? And that's lowballing it. You're telling me that a full 50% more material would be in this, that you're telling me that the movies I saw were 2/3 of all the content that could have been done. And I know there's like the subplots with the house elves, subplots with other things, and that, again, lowballing it. What if it's like 6 hours per season? You telling me this would be twice as much content? How much was genuinely cut from what was considered a faithful adaptation? And looking through lists of this in reaction to this news, the only things I can really see are, apart from like a subplot with the house elves, a thing here, a thing there, the through line I've noticed, and tell me in the comments, I do want you to tell me in the comments what could have been cut, what would be cut differently. The through line seems to be a lot of backstory stuff about his parents' generation that had to be cut for time, like more detail on the Marauders, more detail on his father, and he was actually kind of a bully, but he grew out of it, with his mother, with Snape, a lot of Snape backstory stuff, which was cut down for time, like mentioning why he's called the Half-Blood Prince and stuff. And so much of this ties back into backstory about his parents, I realize this is an argument for a prequel, not a reboot. That is the key takeaway I had, that so many of these singles backstory that got cut for time. You want a prequel story. I know the elephant in the room is the controversies about what J.K. Rowling said, these public controversies about her comments on transgender people. I don't even need to bring that into the conversation here for this to be a bad idea. That this isn't like when they made the Fantastic Beasts movies or the recent Harry Potter video game. This is a new low. This is a different bar has been set. That, case in point, is proof of this, and please tell me in the comments. Imagine if they said, we want to make a Harry Potter universe TV series and it's a prequel about his parents' generation. That it's about the first Wizarding War, and it might even be 5 to 10 years long, but it's covering the earlier generation. It would be ridiculed or controversial about as much as Fantastic Beasts or the video game were. That's not what the issue is. That's deflecting from, this was a faithful adaptation that you were already hands-on with, and I'm struggling to find reasons to reboot it. Even Lord of the Rings, you could argue, well, it's just such a massive book series, there's stuff you have to cut out. There's always the tonal choice of different characters. On a scale of 100 years, I think they will remake it, but again, the danger of, well, then you'd change other things, that there's different ways you could go, versus, because Tolkien wasn't involved with it, versus you were heavily involved with this. There is no reason to remake this. I'm struggling to think of what you will do differently, and the size of it, above all, if they said, well, we're going to do 8 seasons of like 3 hours each, I go, oh, okay, I see you're adding stuff back in, it's still a little, why would you do that? How would you even fill 10 seasons with this is beyond me, that you didn't cut that much material, I don't think. So, this fills me with hope that if something this unnecessary could happen, ignoring the controversy stuff, that this was a good adaptation that you made a decade ago, a little over a decade ago, fills me with hope that we could get the A Song of Ice and Fire faithful reboot we need. And when I say a reboot, I say we're just going to do it the way the X-Men movies did it, where Days of Future Past basically just retconned the last one, spelling it out. I think all of the new spin-offs like House of the Dragon, Dunk and Egg, while loosely visually similar, I think they're just eventually going to go, oh, by the way, next year we're making an A Song of Ice and Fire thing, and it's in canon with House of the Dragon and Dunk and Egg and any other spin-offs they make. That it's just a do-over of the first series with a team of actual professional writers in charge, and not just celebrity fanboys who had no formal training in television production, who were given a blank check and officially no oversight. That a major point of my channel, if you're new here, please subscribe. If you're new, please watch the documentary video I posted at the beginning, which is clips of behind-the-scenes things about the Last Watch documentary, and I intercut it with embarrassing interviews they did, where they admit how unqualified they were. All of this was in public. The news media let us down. The people who should have been the guardians, who should have been doing, research on, like, who is this guy who's making this show? They're just hype reporters who didn't feel like actually doing journalism. They did puff pieces on these guys. They gave them a free pass. But in retrospect, this is awful. The only comparison I can think of is like how, it's infotainment. It's like how the 4 years after 2017's Justice League came out, people were hesitant to criticize Joss Whedon for it, because all of these reporters had grown up on his content. They didn't feel like criticizing him, for this was a really bad movie, and we hear these rumors about there were behind-the-scenes problems, that you didn't criticize him, that he was on that much of a pedestal, that just how much this fake celebrity, manufactured celebrity came in, did a terrible job of making this as a TV show, even in the earlier seasons, though retroactive, like this wasn't just season, it was half of the show. That this is begging for a new adaptation, we're just going to throw out the other one, basically. That I am filled with hope that if an idea as silly as a Harry Potter reboot could happen, they would reboot this. And that's what I've been saying since Season 8, since before Season 8. I said, I know this is going to fail because I realize they're crazy. We're going to have prequels. We need successful prequel spin-offs for about a decade to show that this franchise still has interest in it, is still a moneymaker, which is what they care about, and maybe 10 years from now we'll talk about a reboot. Realistically, we won't be talking about a reboot either until a new adaptation, until either the final book is finished or George R.R. Martin is dead, whichever comes first. We will be having discussions, like, if he's still alive and hasn't finished the final book, he's not going to greenlight yet another adaptation before it's done. That's just reality. But 10 to 20 years from now, as opposed to not in my lifetime, we will be discussing this should have gotten the best, and instead you treat it as an afterthought. That season 1, HBO thought season 1 would fail, and they didn't even check in on it. There's all these behind-the-scenes books about how they ignored the production on this, because, well, it's just some stupid fantasy show. They didn't understand the gem that just had fallen into their laps with this, so there was very little oversight, and they put their third-string people on it. And suddenly, then they bizarrely put their best directors on it. That, why didn't we get the best? Like N.K. Jemisin said right after the season 8 thing, why did we get people who were untrained and terrible writers and who are not screenwriters? They have no experience and are openly taunting, we didn't know what we were doing. Why, that she said, this should haunt you, that we didn't get the best for this, that we had to settle because there is a glass ceiling for fantasy, or there was 10 years ago. So if an idea this bad could happen, the big thing is, the TV industry is disloyal. And despite everything, Benioff and Weiss think they'll be loyal to them. Like, they betrayed HBO. They wanted to run off to make Star Wars movies. This is whole thing in the behind-the-scenes book where they go, HBO seriously thought this would run 10 seasons. And then they marched in after season 6 and said, we only want to do 13 more episodes because we want to leave to do Star Wars stuff, and we're even going to Netflix now. And that HBO was, the leadership, like Plepler, was utterly surprised at their disloyalty. And it's like, they were disloyal to Martin. They have betrayed everyone. They are disloyal to their own subordinates. They are constantly, shifting out directors. They mistreat the cast. They have terrible production value, the way they're treating everyone. And despite all of these betrayals, you thought you were special and that, well, I have a relationship with them. That when you are disloyal and betray people, it makes it that much easier for other people to betray you. That what you think, after everything they did, that they left this, they ended it early, salted the earth as they left, and seriously damaged this IP, this franchise, and then left for Netflix, that what, Warner Discovery is going to feel that you're untouchable, that no, this is sacred, you can't remake our thing. Now, there is the issue of licensing and stuff, obviously, but that I think there are discussions at Warner now, not serious ones, but of, I wish we could reboot that. Or that they're hoping to on a scale of a decade. Like, have successful prequels and maybe a decade from now, reboot this. But relatively early, like 12 years after the finale is 2031. That isn't 30 years, that's relatively soon in the grand scheme of things that we would be rebooting this. Tell me in the comments, if tomorrow they said we want to do a remake of A Song of Ice and Fire, and it'll be at least 10 seasons, would that generate the same backlash and ridicule that this Harry Potter project has generated, even though this Harry Potter project is real and has been greenlit? It also makes me think of, like, The Witcher and stuff, that we're not as angry that, like, Henry Cavill is leaving. Like, what if he had to leave for a medical condition, and Liam Hemsworth stepped in to do it? We're mad because he is leaving on a matter of principle, because he said, this isn't a faithful adaptation and I want no part of it. And I'm fighting with the writers from season 2. That if like, Disney or Warner acquired The Witcher and said, we're going to do a reboot and we promise it'll be faithful, that would turn some heads. So, in the grand scheme of things, because the TV industry is disloyal and greedy and always trying to make reboots, and nothing is sacred to them. If you have a really good series, they'll make a bad reboot, and you could ignore it because you still have the wonderful originals. And if you get a bad adaptation of something, wait around long enough, you'll eventually get a new attempt at rebooting it, which could be good. So, on the long scale of things, nothing is sacred, and we will get that reboot because nothing succeeds like success. If there is demand for a reboot, and if you get competent people on it, it seems doubtful now, but I expect on a scale of 20 years to be looking at an actress playing the real Sansa, the real Arya, the real Jon Snow of the books. The story that George R. R. Martin, the American Tolkien, made. And I love the cast members, the ones who were nice to the fans. I love them, and I feel bad about what happened to them. Anyone who's seen those, I have them on my channel, the table reads for season 8. I think some of these actors would even be supportive, some of them, of I'm happy someone is telling the story right of this character I really liked, that I was part of me and that they ruined. I'm happy someone is getting to tell the real story of this character. So that's my thoughts. People ask me, what are your thoughts on that reboot? It fills me with hope. That is it that crazy to say, oh, if anyone tells you in the comments, Twitter or whatever, if you go, I think we can get a reboot within a decade, a new attempt at making A Song of Ice and Fire, as soon as Martin's done or when he dies, within 20 years, whichever comes first, realistically, Harry Potter is getting a reboot. So many things get unnecessary reboots. So all the things I asked about, please share with me in the comments your thoughts on this. And again, it's nothing about, it doesn't even need to touch on to Rowling's controversies with other things she said. This is a stupid idea for a reboot. And it fills me with hope that things that need reboots could get one.